every Sunday, we gather here at the Ethical Society. We've been doing this for over 100 years. The ethical movement goes back to 1875. It was founded under the idea that you could create a different form of place and congregation, membership society, that was not based on a specific religious tradition, but instead a universal and mixed approach to putting ethics into action. It's about putting ethics into action, coming together around reason, science, discovery, curiosity, and a love of the arts. And you'll see around you today on our walls, we have our first Artist in Residence exhibition that you'll learn a little bit more about today. So there's a long and storied tradition to the ethical societies. So I asked who's here for the first time. Well, who's been coming for over 10 years? Raise your hand. So these are the people you want to approach to ask about some of that history, some of those stories. And what about folks who are right in the middle? Under 5 years, they've been around? Or between 0 and 10? So these are, if you want to get to know each other, get to know someone new in the Ethical Society, come say hi. We always have it's not exactly a coffee hour today because we don't have coffee. It's a light tea hour and with some fruit. But we always have some time right afterwards to get to know each other. So, more than anything else, the Ethical Society is a shared space for us to come together and improve the world. And that also means knowing, trying to understand the world and understand our history, and our shared history. And so that's a lot of today's platform is going to be about that. But we have a few rituals that we do every Sunday. One is a moment of silence and a sharing of joys and concerns. And so before we go around the room and people can briefly share joys and concerns, something happening in their life, someone they're thinking about, something they're excited about, briefly, we take a moment of silence. And so I'll give you about a minute, take a deep breath, relax, and then I'll call you back in. Joys and concerns. We all have them. Everyone's sitting with them. You do not need to share them, but you are welcome to. Michelle.
Good morning. I wanted just to say thank you that today it doesn't rain, so my grandchildren who are 6 and 10 will be biking from Germantown to the art museum, and I will meet them in their favorite room with all the middle-aged, I don't know what's the word in English, you know, in the Middle Age was warriors who are wearing this very special outfit, so they will not be hurt. So anyway, I'm very happy that it doesn't rain. So thank you.
Joys about the rain.
Joy or
No, you can share anything you like, joy or concern.
My concern is for the human beings that are about to be subjected to being deported from the United States as a result of the recent Supreme Court ruling.
Thank you, Sharon. Kate?
Yeah, I just want to, and I'm not a football/soccer fan, and I'm certainly not a FIFA fan, but I just love this World Cup thing that's going on. I mean, isn't it a great thing where all of the countries just compete against each other, and sometimes little countries win over big countries, and the fans are just like fantastic, and it's just, and the fact that, it's the whole world, right? football, because that's only here. Well, it's, what? American football, right, sorry. But, it's just like, I don't know, I think it's just, we need this right now. We need a lot of things right now, but I think that centering this right now is just like a wonderful thing. And, you know, and here we are in Philly, here we are at 250, and there's all of that. Oh gosh, it's just crazy. It's great.
Okay, Liz.
I just wanted to agree with the FIFA thing. It makes me so happy. Like I was in, well, I live in Philly, obviously, and then I went to go visit my family in Mexico like a couple months ago, and then I went to Canada, to Toronto, just to like vibe, and it was like the same thing was happening in all three places. And at one point I saw a shirt, and it was like the American flag next to the Mexican flag, next to the Canadian flag, and I was like, I have never seen those like together before, you know what I mean? Like, it's very few times that we acknowledge ourselves as like a collective continent. Like we're always, I feel like at least for me, it's always felt so divided. So to feel like we are one unified continent, for me is really healing right now, especially. And also because like, yeah, like America is a continent, the United States is a country, but when you say America, you're talking about the entire continent, which does include Mexico and Canada. So I feel like American today, in like an international way. And also I'm a member now. Yay!
So, did you have any?
I said yes,
Oh, yes.
you know, because we can come here. I'm very happy because Colombia was part of the group now. I'm rooting for Colombia in the World Cup. I'm already rooting for Colombia, so and I definitely agree with everyone here. It's been such a nice feeling to feel like we can be a united world and continent. So, Colombia.
Has anybody seen the content of like people around the world trying American food? I love that.
You want to share that as a joy?
Yeah, you know? Yeah, sorry, I was just talking about how much like, personally, I love food. One of the big reasons I traveled to South Korea was to eat the food, and I lived there for 2 years, and it was really fun. So like watching people from all over the world like eat American food and having like Texas barbecue or Philly cheesesteaks or just like really having their mind blown by just like different flavors and like there's this really beautiful rant on Twitter where like a Japanese man is just absolutely astounded by the concept of like chips and salsa. Because he's like, you're giving this to us for free and it's unlimited and it's just like it's this beautiful poetry of his amazement over the generosity. And I thought it was really cool. You should check it out if you haven't seen it.
So this is a joy. So progressive Democrats had 3 really big wins, no, 4 really big wins in New York that I'm really excited about. So there was the rent freeze, which got approved, which is a huge deal for renting New Yorkers. And 3 progressive sort of Democratic socialist aligned candidates upended some of the more establishment types in the primary. So I, as a Democratic socialist myself, am very excited about that.
Okay. Okay. So, slight concern is that our wonderful bassist Warren Ori did not show up this morning, so I'm a little bit either concerned, although I have a feeling he just forgot, and I forgot to remind him. But Warren is an incredible bassist, plays the upright bass. And one of my favorite rituals every Sunday is we have music before and after platform. Unfortunately today, that's not going to happen because I don't see Warren. But it's a core part of what ethical culture is about, is providing a shared space for arts and culture. So I'll text Warren, make sure he's okay, and he'll be back here for sure. He's been playing concerts in the space for decades. Okay, today's platform is titled The Ethics of Memory, Black History in Philadelphia. and been looking forward to this one for a while. So I'm going to read the bios of our two panelists, and I will call up our two moderators, who are both members of the Ethical Society, up here on stage, and then we will jump right into it. So Mijuel K. Johnson has become one of Philadelphia's most respected Black history tour guides through his work with the Black Journey walking tours. Johnson has become an advocate for preserving historical memory, speaking publicly about the importance of maintaining accurate historical exhibits and ensuring that difficult chapters of American history are not erased or forgotten. By helping people understand the struggles and achievements of earlier generations, he encourages thoughtful conversations about citizenship, justice, and community. Among the tours offered through the Black Journey are explorations of Philadelphia's historic 7th Ward, neighborhood that I grew up in, made famous through the work of W.E.B. Du Bois in his groundbreaking study, The Philadelphia Negro. Amy Cohen is an educator, historian, and writer. After 20 years teaching social studies, I was sad that I didn't have Amy in middle school. She became Director of Education for History Making Productions and is a contributing writer for Hidden City, Philadelphia. Her book, Black History in the Philadelphia Landscape, explores events spanning from the late 1600s through the 20th century and how those events are memorialized in the city, followed by a short list of actions to take to learn more about each topic. For example, a marker to visit, a website to explore, a film to watch, primary source to examine. Many chapters feature reflections by Philadelphians with direct connections to the topic. And I'll let them choose what they want to share about themselves on stage. Moderating, we have Aissia Richardson and Erik Younge, who are both longtime members of the Ethical Society. Let's give both the panelists and the moderators a round of applause. Let's welcome them up. I hope you should comfortably get on stage. This is probably the safest entrance.
Knock 'em dead, Erik.
Welcome. Another round of applause to break the silence. One mic for the moderators and one for the panelists, and I'll kick us off just by asking a question to the two panelists. If you could share, starting with Mijuel and Amy, about how you came to do this work, a little bit about yourself, so we have some personal context of how you arrived at what you do today, and then we'll pass it over to Aissia and Erik.
Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Mijuel, and I've always loved history and politics, and current affairs. I'm born and raised in Philadelphia, and I'm from South Philly. From Philly, I have a degree in history and political science from the South University, and an associate's degree in politics from the Community College of Philadelphia too. My family's been in Philadelphia, depending on which side, from between 100 and 200 years, and grew up in South Philadelphia, and family history was always something that was important. It was important where at my maternal grandmother's house on 6th Street in South Philly, we always had portraits of the family members. The family members, including my grandfather's mother in the middle, and the funny thing about my grandmother, and her brother, were actually and that's one number when my mother was growing up. The family literally just purchased 2 houses that were like 1 house apart, so she grew up with her cousins as her neighbors. And this was something that we just grew up with in the neighborhood. And just growing up in Philadelphia, you can't escape history. In history, literally everywhere you go, every step you take, there is a history there that you may not necessarily realize. As I've crossed Washington Avenue and have moved so many times, and only to find out later in life that the train tracks that I'm crossing are train tracks that Abraham Lincoln's body was brought across. And on his brought across because where the Sprouts is now, why it's called Lincoln Square. It's called Lincoln Square was where his body was stored. It was stored on his way to Lion State at Independence Hall. Independence Hall, or walking past houses that were stops on the underground railroad, but you see them every single day. And so preserving the history of Philadelphia and history writ large is something that is deeply personal to me. Especially when it comes to places, for example, like the President's House. Long before I gave tours, studied tours in 2019 with the Black Journey, and the invitation of the owner and founder of the Black Journey, my friend Nancy. I remember the opening of the exhibit, and I was so excited, about it, to finally see my history, my direct history as an African American, told right in front of Independence Hall. And to have that history illustrated for the entire world to see. Even as someone who was like literally born 4 blocks away, right at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital. In the hospital, at his first job outside of high school as in the gift shop at the visitor center. For some reason, Independence Hall, they just keep trying to bring me back. You know what I mean? We're here and seeing that exhibit and everything that's happened with the exhibit. What I can say is that fight continues, and it's hard, but we've been through a lot worse, and so I feel like this is just one more bump along the road towards building a more perfect union.
Thank you, Mijuel. And actually, my answer, we have a lot of parallels. Similar to Mijuel, I have very deep roots in Philadelphia, dating back to the 1840s. I grew up in Center City, always loved history. I was a history major in college. Also got a master's in history at Penn. And yeah, in the fall of 2003, I was teaching a history of Philadelphia elective for the first time, and it was so eye-opening. There was so much about our city's history, especially Black history, that was completely new to me, despite my master's, MBA in history. And it was a really special group of students. I was a teacher at Masterman then, and we applied for a historical marker to commemorate an 1842 anti-Black riot that happened, and that marker has now been on the corner of 7th and Lombard for over 20 years across from Mother Bethel Church. So that was a really fundamental turning point for me in terms of realizing that there's so much history that is, for various reasons, hidden or obscured. But then the next big turning point was in 2005 when Philadelphia became the first school district in the country to require a year of African American history as a graduation requirement. I volunteered to teach the course, not really understanding the depth of my ignorance, but my one kind of toehold I had was that I had taught this history of Philadelphia elective, so I always kind of centered local history in the Black history course and found that students really responded to learning what had happened here. And also similar to Mijuel, the whole President's House story was central to that. When I was teaching in 2003, it was still new information that there were slave quarters expressly built by President George Washington that had been relocated, or they'd been found through archaeological research, and it was discovered that they were going to be directly adjacent to the entrance of the new Liberty Bell Pavilion. And at that point, I mean, I remember having discussions in that class, and it was a minority view, but there were some students who said, no, we shouldn't besmirch the memory of founding fathers. There's no need to commemorate that. Most of the students felt otherwise, and this amazing coalition of grassroots activists, journalists, and historians came together, and I was teaching the course in 2010 when the President's House Memorial opened, and that was so exciting, and was such a turning point for how Black history was viewed in Philadelphia and for how the National Park Service viewed Philadelphia Black history. And then, as Phil caught you up, I left the classroom in 2013, did other work, but always related to local history and often local Black history, and eventually wrote this book. And when people would say, what's your book about? The example I would always give is, well, the President's House site. How that went from something that most people didn't know anything about to this centrally placed memorial right there on Independence Hall. And when the book came out in 2024, when I would do speaking engagements, the chapter I was most likely to read from was the President's House chapter, which ends on such a positive note. And I kind of frame it as happening toward the beginning of the 21st century, and the 21st century being this grand story of revelation of hidden Black history and how much more has been recognized. And then, of course, what's happened more recently has been gut punch after gut punch, with the exception of the fact that the Philadelphia coalition that was formed back in the early 21st century has still held strong. And despite recent court defeats that you may have read about in the paper, like Philadelphia, and again, grassroots journalists, historians, regular people are fighting back, and so that's kind of where I am right now with my understanding of Black history and why it's important to hold on to it and preserve it even in the current environment.
Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Aissia Richardson. I grew up in ethical culture. Both my grandparents and my mother were members of the society, and I grew up as a child here. So I'm really glad to be here as an adult, speaking to folks about issues that are important. Pan-Africanism is something that was very important in our family. I grew up in a Pan-Africanist family, and so for us, history was really based on Old Gorge and the libraries in Timbuktu. And so I want to ask about the threat to how African American history is being rewritten, and what can we do using the Pan-Africanist lens to be able to articulate African American history. Mijuel, would you like to start?
So would you just reiterate the question?
Well, the question is really about the rewriting of African American history. And so what can we do to make sure that African American history is preserved?
Really making sure that African American history is preserved, and particularly through the lens of Pan-Africanism?
Yeah, because I think that sometimes history here is, or African American history is centered around the enslavement. And so how can we talk about a broader perspective of African American history?
I don't think that how we preserve her African American history is particularly important when we emphasize the idea that African American history is a part of a broader history, not only for the United States, but also into the Pan-African context. All of the history is intertwined. All of the history is linked. History is linked. There are African Americans who have ancestors who were brought here directly, from Africa, and also some who were brought here indirectly, by way of the Caribbean, and also some who have ancestors who migrated from the Caribbean, who have been some by force, some by choice. Always one by choice, and broadly integrated into the community itself. And so, of course, the idea of Pan-Africanism, one could argue, is an African American idea. An American idea, if you start with Marcus Garvey, although Marcus Garvey immigrates from Jamaica, moves from Jamaica to the United States, it takes root here in the United States. And you'll notice that on the Black Journey tours, we carry the Pan-African flag. Pan-African flag had which Garvey created to keep the whole group together. So they get lost, they should look at the flag. But we carry the flag with us, and for that context, was that this is a global story inside the African American Philadelphia story. So how do we preserve that? How do we preserve her building? How do we preserve African American history? Right. I think we do it by, first of all, making sure that we acknowledge that the history, that it is what it is. It is what it is. The history of enslavement is a fundamental part of our history. It is not the totality of our history, but it is a fundamental part of it, and I don't think that we should walk away from it. We walk away from it in the sense that there's often a discussion of like how do we move past or beyond slavery, and my thought on that is that you take the history as it is, not so much trying to run from it, but in enveloping it, and say that this is like I'll give an example of an encounter I had with a advisor and friend. When I first met them at LaSalle University. We were just talking and some introductions, talk about the basic family stuff, and I'd say one of the things I mentioned first and foremost was like, I'm an African American, descendant of enslaved people, I'm the fifth generation descendant of slaves. And her response to that was, you're the first brother I know who actually said with pride he's a descendant of enslaved people. And just like having an idea, and I'm like, well, yeah, because the people who were enslaved, they did nothing wrong. Slavery was something that was done to them. So what do I have to be ashamed of? I'm a fifth generation descendant of enslaved people, and I'm proud of that my ancestors were able to endure that. So I don't like the idea of running from slavery, just saying that, hey, this is the history. It's history. I don't eat, for example, I personally don't eat chitlins. I eat chitlins because I don't eat pork. But there are some people who would say they don't want to eat it simply because it's quote unquote slave food. But you'll eat oxtail, which is Jamaican slave food. So why not eat your own? Like this is bring all these things together and just embrace our history. We preserve it by telling the full story of our history. We preserve it by making sure that different areas, because it's not all about place. Sometimes it is about place. Some places like the President's House, like Congo Square, Philadelphia, Washington Square Park, where we have ancestors buried. Right? It's preserved like places like St. Mentioned in North Philadelphia. And that plus also historic Diamond Street, or not Diamond Street, and elsewhere, making sure that we acknowledge how is the full history of Philadelphia and say, yes, this is currently the fifth blackest city in the United States, and that the black history of Philly is integral to the history of Philadelphia. And we preserve that, doing that by first acknowledging it, recognizing it, accepting it, and making sure that we tell it in the way that is unvarnished, and that this is the history as it is, regardless of whether an individual likes it or not, whether that individual is president of the White House, or that individual is somebody just walking down the street who doesn't know anything. If that answers the question.
Yes, thank you.
I'm going to answer that slightly differently, and I'm not sure I can quite make the leap to Pan-Africanism, but in terms of preserving Black history, I'm going to start with some optimism, which is that I don't know how I could ever count the number, but many more people across the city and the country now know about Washington enslaving people in the president's house because of the administration's actions than ever would have known. I mean, this has made national and even international news, and so to some degree, the toothpaste is out of the tube. Another reason for optimism is, at least in this region, there is so much grassroots historical by people like Miss Judith, who's here in the front row. Mijuel, Miss Judith, and I were all among many participants in a consortium or symposium at the Historical Society last year, where it was all regular people. I mean, there were very few PhDs on the stage, or if the people had PhDs, it was like in biochemistry, and then in retirement, they became interested in an African-American graveyard in their neighborhood and started doing the research. And with the online tools that are now available, there's just a lot of good history being done and history being revealed. My reason for pessimism is just the regionalism of the United States. Like the consortium at the Historical Society, they had any number of people to choose from, and people in this region can find support for their work. I worry about, for better or for worse, I'll use the term red states, where curricula are being changed to repress Black history, to turn stories of the founding fathers into hagiographies. So I don't think it's necessarily an optimistic picture all around, but I think in Philadelphia, telling Black history, preserving Black history will continue, and some of it has to do with the African American history requirement, which I really thought would be on the chopping block. I just sort of assumed that the current administration would say, well, we're going to cut off Philadelphia's Title I money if you continue requiring this course, but it hasn't happened, and it means at this point generations of Philadelphia students have, you know, a pretty good sense of Black history, certainly compared to their peers from other parts of the country.
Thank you. I'm going to turn the mic over to my co-moderator, Erik.
Thank you. For those who don't know, my name is Erik Younge. I'm a member of the Ethical Society for about 10 years, I believe, and also a member of the Ending Racism Task Force, which I'll explain more later. And it's strange because real quick, I'm kind of a distant participant in one of the stories that Amy Cohen talked about. It's the last one in the book. the 1967 police attack on students at the Board of Education. And as she pointed out, one of the great things about this book is that there are things to do and things that people can follow up on, which I really appreciate. It's really fantastic. So that's kind of a different thing for me when I go by there at Memorial. And the book hit me, and I think other people that I talked to that were participants in this. So I'm really appreciative of that and just the way the book was done. I guess my question, to follow up on that, is the technology that's involved, for me, seems to have given more opportunities or more other ways to tell, for young kids who are still around, or not young, we're not young anymore, but still, to do that. Do you feel that there's the technology or other ways, more inventive ways to continue people telling their stories, and parents like myself following up on the stories that are in this book, and also because of tours, which I've taken a number of tours about, how do we use the technology? Can we use the technology better to increase this and to make sure that we can overcome the obstacles in our way? So.
I'll give a quick response to to some of what you brought up, and then Mijuel will be much younger, might have more technological ideas than I do, but I just want to say that the 1967 Black student walkout, there is a historical marker commemorating that event, and that marker was applied for by students in the African American, who had taken the African American history course in 10th grade, and then when they were in 11th and 12th grade, and as a follow-up, applied for this marker. So it's a full circle moment, because one of the reasons that students like Erik walked out was demanding more Black history courses in Philadelphia high schools. And you know, the technological piece of that is just that these students in particular had done research about the student walkout as part of a program known as National History Day, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's basically like a national science fair but about history. And I used to have my students do it, and they compete in different categories, like websites or documentaries or exhibits. And because of technology, these students are able to, I listen to students Skype with Representative John Lewis, because they were doing a project on the Freedom Rides. Students are able to make documentaries, just sitting at home on their laptops that are incredible quality. So from my perspective, a lot of the technology is just that people not only have like vast databases and ancestry and all kinds of online primary sources they can pull from, but then they can turn that around and create really high quality documentaries and websites and so forth to tell those stories.
Yes, absolutely. For using technology to tell history, I can say that an example of that would definitely be the 1850 Black Metropolis Project. The project, which I'm supposed to also be institutional liaison for the 1850 Black Metropolis Project. The project, but we started organized by Mijuel Younge and Morgan Lloyd, and they just done a fantastic job of utilizing technology, especially as Erik was describing, to visually expose the history, the Black history of Philadelphia. I do think technology has a very important role to play in the telling of history, because it is our story. our story. It's the story of all of us. And particularly when it comes to telling the story of Black history, we know that Black history, a lot of it often has been oral history. Oral history is told by the ancestors, by the ancestral griots, and so forth, and more down through the generations. So utilizing technology to store for our collective knowledge of who we are, and our and our contributions, and our legacies. Our legacies is critically important. It's critically important in order to tell the story of Black history, and to document it. And it's incredibly impressive that I can tell you a lot of the storied activism around history and so many other things that have been happening in this city, and across the country with regards to Black history, or we're talking about justice and history, we're talking about housing justice and environmental justice. A lot of this is being led by young people, and young people of color, particularly young women of color, and members of the LGBTQI plus community as well. I think utilizing technology, especially things like social media, and documentary evidence, and combining that with the traditional sources, those sources of the traditional techniques, like the primary sources in the archives and the libraries and galleries. All of these things can be used to make sure that this history is being fully told, because it's only by telling the full history of African Americans and of the United States more broadly that we actually can build this country to what we want it to be and what it says it is, what it says it's supposed to be.
I just want to add one thing, which is I always take any opportunity to shout out the 1838 Black Metropolis project, which unfortunately kind of went online too late to be in my book, but it is an incredible history project, but also one that is so visually rich that it just really meets the moment. So if you're not familiar with that, just 1838 Black Metropolis.
So I have a question about how folks can preserve their own family histories. I have a shoebox full of obituaries that my grandmother wrote family history on it. And so when my grandmother passed away, she had a collection that is at Bryn Mawr now, and my grandfather was a jazz aficionado, and his collection is at Rutgers. But how can folks that are everyday folks preserve their history?
Everyday people can preserve their history. The shoebox is definitely a way. That's definitely a way. In my family, we definitely have drawers where we keep, like I said, the obituaries and others. But I think that we preserve the history by going back to the technology aspect, by also recording our history, but also by making sure that we're not afraid of our history, that we allow ourselves to, for example, have our kids, make it okay for our kids to ask about our history. That's why our history. So if a kid asks, what about slavery? Like when my nieces and nephews were growing up, I always said to my sisters and brothers that I gave, when they ask me about slavery, I'm not sugarcoating anything. Because they have to know the reality of what happened. And teaching the history to our kids, and making sure that they know that it's a part of them. Because oftentimes we can look at history as an abstract subject. That this is the quote-unquote old dead people. And the reality is it's not. History is, yes, people and things and events that have passed, but it's also people, things, and events that are sitting in this room right now. history, as I remind people on the tours is not just a pass. You actually live history every single day. Every single day, and you have the opportunity. Everybody in this room right now has the opportunity to make history every single day. The question is, are we going to use it, and use it wisely? Because everything that is today is a result of what was yesterday, and everything that will be tomorrow will be a result of what is today. You're making history right now just by sitting here. By sitting here and engaging in this conversation. The question is, what do we do with it more broadly? So how do we preserve, how do we help individuals and families preserve their history? I think it's making the resources available, making the resources publicly available, not behind a paywall necessarily, not behind a paywall, opening up institutions. Amy had mentioned earlier about the Historical Society and where we were talking about, most of the people in the room did not have PhDs. Unfortunately, in the history profession, the top mark is always the PhD. We haven't got, other professions have found other things. But we have to democratize the history profession. And in some ways, that's being done by itself. As I mentioned, young people taking history into their own hands and learning the skills that a PhD holder might try. That would have learned academically, they're learning socially. And so we democratize the history space, and we actually make it truly our own history. Our story. Right? I think that is a way that we can actually preserve history for ourselves as individuals and our families more broadly.
I kind of am my family historian, so there's two things that I think anyone can do. One is, if you have things that might be of interest, if there's an archive that you can donate it to, you don't know, maybe no one's going to make use of those materials in your lifetime, but down the road, they certainly may be of use. My father, who lived right catty corner here at the Dorchester for many years, was a big writer of letters, and I donated those letters to the William Way LGBTQIA archives a number of years ago. To me, I don't know why anyone would be particularly interested in reading the minutiae of my dad's life, except at some point when someone wants to do research of what was it like to be a gay man in Philadelphia in the 1980s, it will be a treasure trove. Something else that I would suggest is, if you can read cursive, is transcribing family letters, because cursive is a bit of a dying art, and actually I was just talking with my mother-in-law, who's here today, because her father, who served in India during the Second World War and also traveled extensively in Europe between the wars, wrote a lot of letters that she has, and I said it would be my honor to transcribe them because they'll be interesting, but if they are typed out, my children and their grandchildren and so forth are more likely to read them. And then just a quick story of where this can lead. I have the privilege of being a longtime Philadelphian who has the platform of Hidden City, and I've written a number of articles about my own family history, but one of them was based on a memoir that my great-grandfather wrote about immigrating from Russia on his own at age 13 and coming to Philadelphia. And my father had donated this memoir to the Balch Institute, which is now part of the Historical Society, and I had transcribed it for my family. But then I ended up writing an article about it for Hidden City, because it's just so vivid. He talks about, selling shoes on South Street and delivering things to the U.S. Mint building, which is now part of CCP. And anyway, I wrote this article, and then less than a year ago, I saw I was getting a phone call from Austin, Texas. I figured, some kind of spam. I don't know anyone in Austin. I listened to the message. It was the LBJ Library at the University of Texas. They wanted to put up an exhibit in 2026 about immigration to the U.S. and to make it more understandable, they wanted to highlight one person from each major wave of immigration. And sure enough, my great-grandfather is now featured in this exhibit as the representative, Eastern European Russian Jew who came to the U.S. in the late 1890s. So archive, transcribe, and maybe you'll get really lucky, because I feel really fortunate that he's getting tribute in that way, just a really ordinary person.
Thank you.
Two things in the book, and the two people that I wanted to bring up, because they bring up a different aspect of Joe Benton and Lamont. The poet was quite a person, as you know, anybody was talking about. But that brings up with the question of the arts, whether it's music or literature. It seems to be more people writing about Philadelphia. And I just read a book called Malcolm and Me by a woman named Robin Farmer, which talked about a young girl in Philadelphia who goes through a Catholic school, which really resonates with me. There aren't too many about blacks that go to Catholic school in the 70s and the 60s and what that was like. And that's because my mother, the only reason I went to Catholic schools was a better education. And a lot of black children were similar to that. Otherwise, yeah. So it brought back some things, but what about the arts? Is there, in terms of music or in literature, do you feel it's growing or it's more vibrant now? And any thoughts on that?
Well, Joe Benton, who Erik mentioned, and Mijuel and I smiled at each other, the OG Black Philadelphia tour guide. He's now mostly retired, but also a musician, and has just been such a powerful force in making Black history joyful and experiential for, who knows how many visitors to Philadelphia. And then Lamont Steptoe is a poet who wrote a book of poems about Washington Square. According to oral tradition, some believe it was called Congo Square, and I included one of his poems in my book. Certainly there is a vibrant arts community in Philadelphia, and that actually the symposium I was talking about earlier, there was an entire panel about people who were using music and theater and so forth to bring history to life. But if you read my introduction carefully, you would have noticed that I have a disclaimer that I gave short shrift to artists, musicians, and athletes in the book. So I don't have more to say on that topic.
Yes, always honor and salute to Joe Benton. One that actually comes in for his tremendous role in Black history here in Philadelphia, and the role that arts and culture play in preserving Black history is integral, is crucial, especially here in Philadelphia. The arts and culture scene here in Philadelphia is very much steeped in the Black culture here in Philadelphia. I think it's utilization, though even with all that being said, I do think it's utilization in the full telling of Black history in Philadelphia is to an extent underutilized. There's so much that through art, through whether that's in portraiture, whether that's in architecture, whether that's in music, whether that's in literature, or in poetry, that can be done to help preserve, and advance, hence the history of Black people here in Philadelphia. So I do think that's an important medium, a medium filled with a litany of different media within it. And that can be a bridge between history as an academic study and history as a lived social reality.
Thank you both very much. It is a little past 12 and it's that time to start asking the audience for questions. So if you all, because we like to have an interactive discussion, and we could talk for another 90 minutes about this subject and about the book and about your work, but we do want to find out from the audience if anybody has any questions. I know you have a question. Oh, okay, right back here.
Yeah, I'm so curious if there are any sort of like hidden moments in Black history where when you learned about them, it has really stayed with you for a while. Like something that sometimes you learn something and you think about it when you're in the shower, you think about it when you're walking, and it kind of changes the way you think about life in general when you learn this fact, because it really stays with you. So I guess I'm wondering, are there, if you'd be willing to share some examples of some Black history that's just stayed with you over time and really shaped the way you think?
That's an easy one for me. I just found it in my book. In the summer of 2006, a historical marker in front of a church on 16th and Christian Streets caught my eye. I pulled my car over to read it. First African Baptist Church, founded in 1809 as one of the first Black Baptist churches in America. Later, 2 members sold themselves into slavery to free a slave to serve as pastor. And that just stunned me. And I couldn't let go of it, but in 2006, I was a full-time teacher raising 2 girls. I just didn't have time to really uncover the story until I wrote the book, and there was so much more to be learned, but that was really a moment where my jaw hit the pavement.
Yes, that's a story we share. I've seen that one. I've seen that marker too. We were walking up from my house in Point Breeze, and Black history was nearby there. Another church which the congregation has moved, and the sign has since been replaced with an address plate. But when I saw the cornerstone of what was then First Colored Wesley Church at 17th and Fitzwater Street, and looking at the dates, and it's founded in, coincidentally, 1838, and it was just seeing those words, just seeing the word First Colored here in Philadelphia, in a northern city, and this is a church from the antebellum period, and it reminds you of the depth of living in Philadelphia is basically living in an open air museum, and it's one of the things that I love the most about the city. the city. That moment particularly was striking for me because it showed the things that it helped to illustrate, right, the depth of the history of the Black history that is in that neighborhood, that is in South Philly in particular, which of course, anyone who knows South Philly, you know, it's often talked about as a largely white neighborhood, but in reality, holiday it is, it's not. That is not entirely, it's not. It's not, and just seeing that there was part of it. Also, so learning about the history of the South Philly race war of 1919, where the neighborhood of Point Breeze, the neighborhood I grew up in, and was becoming more and more of a Black neighborhood from an Irish and Jewish neighborhood, and there was violence. There was literally mob attacks. Because we often talk about, it's often, things like this are often called race riots, but in reality, they're not riots, they're mob attacks because they're not spontaneous uprisings. Means they're usually premeditated, hated, but there was violence right there on the street that I see virtually every single day. Someone was killed, a Black man was killed right in front of the police station. Haitian at the intersections of Point Breeze and Ellsworth Street and 22nd Street, and 20th Street. Another example, Hempel would be learning the story of William Still's house here in Philadelphia at 625 Dudley Street. Again, and this, it all sits with me. It reminds me of how deeply intertwined Black history really is with Philadelphia, and with the history of this city, and with my history itself as an individual as well. So those things sit with me with Black history, particularly Black history here,
More questions? Raise your hands. And maybe we'll take 3 at a time, and then so we can get as many questions in as possible.
Hello. Thank you for being here. It's really a pleasure to see you and have you here. I have a question that's around the experience I had a few years ago. I was on Facebook and I saw like a historical image of some Black men being arrested by cops. I think they were like completely naked, and the cops were just around.
No.
Oh, okay. I have a question about her uncle. And I saw that, and one of the first thoughts that came to my mind, which kind of like made me feel a little bit ashamed, was, well, what did these guys do to deserve this treatment? And I realized that, wait a minute, they couldn't have done anything to deserve this treatment. This is just bad behavior on the part of the cops, you know? And that made me rethink sort of my relationship to history and all kinds of images that I see, kind of thinking that, like, well, what did these Black people do to deserve this? And I know that that's not just an issue that has to do with just like how it's taught, like history in history class, but also culture in general. But I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about the part that history, as it is taught, does play into that, as well as how, if you think that it should be taught differently, so that when we view images like that this isn't a reaction that occurs. And the last thing I want to say about that too is that prior to I went to the Indian Racism Task Force yesterday, and I was telling them that when I speak about like racism and think about thoughts about how to end it, I often start with the idea that I myself am racist. I know there's kind of an idea about power in that, like you can't be racist if you're Black, kind of think about power. But I think about that because like I think that my response was a racist response to that, to think that these people were wrong because, just because they were Black, So that's my question.
So can I answer that one?
Yeah, I'm going to throw it back to you.
So there was in like either 71 or 73 that picture was taken, and my aunt cut it out and put it on our living room wall and circled my uncle's butt. So we lived with that picture in our house. So those were the North Philly Black Panthers, And so the Black Panthers are being raided by the police all over the country. And I think it may have been right after Fred Hampton was murdered. And so they took their clothes off themselves. They were the ones that stripped because they didn't want the police to shoot them because they didn't want to die. So they took their clothes off to show them that they were unarmed. That's why that picture that's the background. And that's history, right? Because you have an image and you think, oh, this is what it is. But really, it was them taking control of their lives and saying, you will not murder me today. That's what it was.
I just wanted to add that the Black United Liberation Front, if you don't know, I was part of that group. I wasn't there that day, I was told to stay away. So it was planned, and that's one thing about real history. I urge people to read about Reggie Shell, who was a remarkable human being, and those people, it was a very small cadre. There were only maybe about 6 or 7, I still remember them. But just to give you an idea of what a cadre of the Black Panther Party does, small numbers, bigger results, but also the fact that they control that thing. So I'm glad, thank you that you.
Yeah, that was my Uncle Zaire. Yeah, yeah, that was Zaire's. Yeah.
I have a little to add to that story as well, and it's interesting because I've heard about them taking their clothes off themselves, and most accounts don't say that. Most accounts just kind of take it at face value that the police had stripped them. But what I have to add is that I learned kind of recently that friends of my grandparents who lived in West Mount area near where I live now, they were away for the summer, and their son was kind of, a radical hippie type, and he was like driving a van or something for the Black Panthers that summer, helping them work, helping them with the summer camp. Anyway, when that happened, he came down and swooped up a bunch of the Black Panthers and then took him back to his parents' basement in West Mount area because no one would think to look for them there. And that's a story I've been trying to uncover.
Should we take 3? Try to take 3, Alex?
This one is especially directed at Mijuel, given his political science background. The city is very segregated in a weird way. You have a kind of polyethnic core that's these sort of, well, you guys could call them yuppie types. And then you have these wings of predominantly Black, also a bit Latino, but this is a Black history event and focus on the Black folks. Why is the city like this, and why is there such persistent poverty in the Black quarters? What was done to those folks?
So,
Time to do 3, just wait for time. Let's take 3.
I have a question about somebody who I learned about named John Francis, and your book talks about the history of Philadelphia and Black culture and everything else. And I wanted to know if you learned about John Francis, and I just wanted to know the continuation of his story because they don't really have archives taking his history after he had indentured servitude and served his time and tried to get his white career.
This is going to be the last round of questions. Let's take if you have a question, raise your hand. I'm going to try to get to you so we can take a bunch and then I'll let the panel spend time.
Yeah. So I think one of the, I was just thinking of coming up on July 4th and how we think about our national story. And I think about the misconceptions around, I'm a lawyer, and this is something that I only really learned about in law school, and I feel like more people should know about it, specifically about the Reconstruction Amendments, right? And how, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, all those guys had nothing to do with you getting individual rights out of the Constitution. Didn't happen. That was not a part of it. I think everybody is sort of raised thinking that they gave us individual freedoms and rights. It's not true. It was just restrictions on the federal government. It It had nothing to, like Virginia could do whatever they wanted to do. That changed with the 14th Amendment after the Civil War, right? So I feel like this is a huge misconception about our national story. And obviously it's deeply intertwined with the African American story. It goes beyond that. And like nobody knows, like any politician from the Reconstruction Civil War era except for Lincoln, basically, right? And I think in particular, the people who engage with that era of history overwhelmingly are doing it for the wrong reasons, you know? And I think like there's a really important story. There are a lot of people that we could be really proud of as like northern people, progressive people, but nobody is engaging with that. And so I think where the story comes down, like obviously I'm particularly interested in like Reconstruction, that kind of era, but more generally, like how do we get people, more progressive people, interested in our national story and to have a better, more nuanced understanding of what liberty means in this country and how we actually got it.
Okay, so we got persistent poverty, segregation, why is it what it is? John Francis, July 4th, and our national story, Reconstruction Amendments, 14th Amendment, Constitution of George Washington, story of close Reconstruction. Mijuel, you want to start with why is it what it is?
Yes. So, you know, Philadelphia is a very cosmopolitan, very diverse city, but it also remains one of the 6 most segregated cities in the United States. And part of it is that the reason why I imagine that is redlining. Redlining, which was a federal policy, mostly in the 1900s, literally drawing red lines around neighborhoods, and designating that these are areas that certain people live, especially poor people and people of color, and where there would not be investment. There would not be investments, there would be investment by banks, investment by insurance companies. Notice that in a black neighborhood, for example, or in a redline neighborhood, you will not find necessarily a bank branch. You won't find a bank branch. You'll have to go. So why is that important? Like what's the importance of having a bank branch in your neighborhood? Well, it's important because if you need to get a loan to help renovate your house, you gotta go to a bank branch. And prior to the internet, especially like what you do need to go to a bank branch, and you have to talk to the bank. Well, if it's outside your neighborhood, that's a lot harder for you to do. If your neighborhood is redlined, and I should be clear, redlining is highly illegal today. That's still happening, but it's highly illegal today. But that is the reason for the disinvestment. And it's the creation of the American ghetto in the modern sense. That word ghetto isn't used anymore, but that was the term pretty much used at the time. So you create a situation where you have concentrated poverty. Concentrated poverty is the crux of the problem. Because you have an area, and then especially after the end of segregation, legalized segregation, where you had neighborhoods where people were forced to live regardless of their socioeconomic status. So if you were black, it didn't matter if you were wealthy, relatively speaking, middle class, poor, whatever you lived, you had to live in a black neighborhood. Whereas after that, a lot of wealthier people were able to move out. So then what you have left is an area where it is concentrated, maybe poverty. And when you have concentrated poverty, you have concentrated results of what are called diseases of despair. Diseases of despair, which would be alcoholism, things like that. Now, to be clear, I grew up in a poor black neighborhood. That's not everybody. So I'm not going to paint every poor neighborhood as some kind of an area of vice or anything like that. That's not the case at all. But what I'm saying is, if you're talking about the disparities between people, it's because of issues like redlining. And what you see in neighborhoods today that were historically redlined is the result of that. And a lot of that is changing now, but it's changing through rapid gentrification, which is then pushing people out of the neighborhoods that they were once redlined into. So it's great that, you know, somebody thinks that at my zip code, 19146, is a great place to live. I mean, from the bare bones of it, you know, you're a 30-minute walk from City Hall, 45-minute walk from the sports complex, 50-minute walk from Independence Hall, 50-minute walk from 30th Street. It's nice. But for people who were forced to live in these areas, the houses were relatively inexpensive. My grandfather bought his house for like $3,000. Yeah, $3,000. $1,000. Yeah, you can't do that now. Not at all. But now the gentrification and the property values have risen so rapidly that a lot of people who grew up in the neighborhood cannot afford to live there anymore. And then people say, oh, well, the neighborhood's come up, it's nice. And it's nice. Well, it didn't come up for the people who needed it to come up. You know, they didn't come up. The new people moving in, they have Sprouts and Farmers Market, and those of us who are still able to hold on just a little bit, but for the people who actually needed to have the supermarket there, Erik, who were poor, long story bearable, we couldn't, you know, when I was growing up in the neighborhood, if we had to go when we went food shopping, we walked all the way to 9th Street. We walked over from 16th Street to 9th Street. 9th Street to 9th Street. We walked over to the other side of Broad Street, the white side of Broad Street, East Broad Street, to East Broad Street. We went down south of Washington, south of Snyder Avenue, and the white part of South Philly, to go grocery shopping. That's what we did. But now that you have like stuff like the new Giant and all that, that's all great. But again, for the vast majority of people who needed that there, they were just kicked out. So did you really solve poverty, or did you just move it somewhere else? Oh, so when we talk about the poverty rate of Philadelphia going down, now I always want to look at the quality behind those numbers. As the quantity is fine, like, oh, it went down 2%, okay, great. Hey, but did it go down because we lifted people up, or did it go down because we pushed people out? I want a state in the country, in a world with policies that are about lifting people up, not pushing people out. And that's why you see the persistent poverty in Philadelphia today. It is the result of redlining, it's the result of policies, like Nelson Mandela, I think I said, poverty is a policy choice. Poverty is a policy choice. There is no reason in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, $30 trillion annually, why there should be people eating out of trash cans in Rittenhouse Square to park across from us. There is no reason why that should be the case. There is no reason why people who live on my side of Broad Street, the west side, even with all the gentrification, my neighborhood is now one of the most gentrified neighborhoods in the entire United States. Even with all the gentrification that's happened, people on my side of Broad Street, west side of Broad Street, Point Breeze, Grace Ferry, etc., we have 10, 20-year life expectancy shorter than somebody who lives on the other side of Broad Street. $30,000 income difference. And it's not to say that there's not pockets, because anybody who knows South Philly, you go to the east side of Broad Street, to those neighborhoods, all the neighborhoods are basically working class, middle class white. That's white, except for 5th, 6th, and 7th Street. For some reason, 5th, 6th, and 7th Street. And 7th Street, that's the more diverse, that's the more Black, Asian, Latino, and it's also the poorer part of that area. But that was the stretch. Right? So that's where the history is, and why Philadelphia is the segregated city that it is right now. It is a result of redlining. It's a result of racist policies over centuries, and the way that we solve that is by RAR, recognize, address, and resolve. We have to first recognize that it's there. Then we have to do what we need to do to address it, and then that's when we can ultimately resolve it. But the thing of it is, we have to recognize that the addressing, what we need to do to address it, are things that everybody knows, but sometimes people just don't have the political will to do. The same thing with the United States as a whole. America's problems are self-inflicted wounds. We know what to do. We've done it before, but we don't do it. We know the solution to I'll wrap up. We know the solution to the disparities in Black and brown communities is affirmative action and reparations. We know that. It's all there, but people refuse to do it. We know that the solution for healthcare in the United States is Medicare for all. The Congressional Budget Office has said that, not a progressive institution at all, but even they said the U.S. would save about $400 billion conservatively if we had a Medicare for all system. What can that $400 billion be put into? Education, pre-K through graduate school. Or infrastructure rebuilding. How did we build our infrastructure in the first place? You talk about the national debt. National debt, 100% of GDP. National debt was 127% of GDP after World War II. How do we bring it down? We build our infrastructure and we send people to school in the GI Bill. How do you solve the national debt today? You send people to school, K through graduate school, all for free, and you rebuild our infrastructure. We know how to solve these problems. It's just about getting it done. So.
Thank you. John Francis from the book. Was it John Francis?
No, it's not from the book.
Okay.
So John Francis, I learned about him through the people that live in the small. They tell you a brief story about him being into what he did was he was a soldier who placed out through slavery, and then after he went through slavery to free his wife and baby, they lose sight of his story. So I was just wondering, because you studied like history, if you ever heard of it or any more details about his history.
I have not. It sounds fascinating, but I'm not familiar with it. Are you? John Francis? At first I thought you said Francis Johnson, who was a famous black musician, and I had a great answer, but John Francis, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Well, at least his story was told and his story wasn't erased, because there is no story after his slavery.
I think that's probably endemic of folks who live their lives on the edge or not through written documentation. So a lot of stories do get lost, and I think that's what this is about. It's about helping to preserve those stories. So then the last question is July 4th and the National Story Reconstruction Amendments 14th Amendment. Who's telling the story of post-Reconstruction? I think a really great example, and I'll leave it to the experts, is the movement to recognize Juneteenth. Juneteenth was, historically, it was about the folks who were enslaved in Texas and were not told after 2 years that the Emancipation Proclamation was done. And so there were lots of folks who started celebrating Juneteenth, and it started to spread from Texas to other states. And then here in Pennsylvania, it got put into law as a state holiday in 2019. And then the next year, I think it was done as a federal holiday in 2020, right? And now it's like a paid holiday. And so every year there's a Juneteenth parade along 52nd Street, and also there's a Juneteenth coalition that raises the Juneteenth flag at City Hall. And so also our Welcome America celebration starts on Juneteenth and it goes until July 4th. And so telling those stories is something I think is endemic in the Juneteenth movement.
but I'm gonna leave the question up to you both.
I mean, Reconstruction, it's a really broad question. I would certainly agree with you that Reconstruction, just in kind of conventional American education, was one of the least studied periods. You don't really learn much about it in school. That there was a school of thought about Reconstruction that was really the dominant academic way of looking at Reconstruction for many years, which was that the core idea was that Reconstruction failed because Black people got ahead of themselves. They weren't ready to vote. They weren't ready to serve in office and so forth. Even when that was the dominant academic approach to Reconstruction, W.E.B. Du Bois was saying, no, we need to look at all the successes of Reconstruction. Public education, Black representation in the halls of Congress, which we're about to experience probably fewer Black people in Congress than there were during Reconstruction. So I agree that it's understudied and really essential to understanding where our sense of fundamental rights came from, and then of course the civil rights movement, the big legislation, the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, or sometimes called the Second Reconstruction, but we've seen what the Supreme Court has just done to the Voting Rights Act. I certainly understand your dismay at our ignorance of the importance of Reconstruction and the Reconstruction Acts, but there was a really good piece by Nicole Hannah-Jones in the New York Times Magazine within the last probably 6 weeks, where what ended Reconstruction was a period known as redemption, when at that point the Democratic Party, which was the party that had been affiliated with the Confederates and white Southerners and so forth, took back over. And it's a really brilliant but depressing essay saying we are now in the second redemption.
Yes, I think that it is very important that we focus on Reconstruction, and because there's at least 4, in this case I'll term it war, there are 4 wars in American history that are often regarded as forgotten wars. One of them is the Korean War, one of them is the Spanish-American War, one of them is the War of 1812, and one of them is Reconstruction. And the reason because they're called forgotten is because, like Amy said, you don't really get taught about them in schools. You don't really talk about them in schools and part of it is because with the War of 1812, a lot of Americans like to think we never lost the war. Sorry, we lost that one big time. Lost the War of 1812. Our capital was burned. It was burned, and this, that, and the third. We lost the War of 1812, y'all. Everybody good? Everybody in the childhood? Okay. Hey, lost the War of 1812. Well, we said the Spanish-American War. If you talk about Spanish-American War, you gotta talk about American imperialism. You have to talk about the idea that there were some people in this country who believed in the United States establishing an overseas empire. And for a brief time we did. Now there were also people who did not believe in that because they saw that the U.S. was invited to the Conference of Berlin with the Scramble of Africa. The U.S. refused to go because they said we're a country that fought for our independence against colonialism. Why would we want to colonize Africa? That's part of the reason. That's part of the reason why they refused to go to the Conference of Berlin. But also there were people who were perfectly fine with the U.S. having an empire, especially here in North and South, in the Americas. And for a brief period of time, we did. That's how we acquired places like Puerto Rico, which still needs to have its self-determination recognized. We had Puerto Rico, we had the Philippines control the Dominican Republic. We invaded Haiti for a period of time. These are things that are uncomfortable for us to talk about because they force us to reckon with what I've often described Donald Trump as, but in this case it's Act 2, as our worst demons as opposed to our better angels. And in order for us to truly, again, make this country be what it says it is on paper, and build that more perfect union, we have to recognize the good, bad, and the ugly about our history. For Reconstruction is immensely important because, as you say, you had the 13th Amendment, which abolishes slavery for the most part. You have the 14th Amendment, which does so many things: due process, birthright citizenship, equal protection under the law. You had the 15th Amendment, which gives black men the right to vote. A right which technically here in Pennsylvania, they had under the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1776 and the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1780. Pennsylvania's had 5 constitutions, y'all. 1790, because those constitutions said free men who own property. They didn't mention white, didn't say anything like that. So technically they had the right to vote, although there were tons of restrictions, especially violence and put them for that. But then they lost that right to vote in the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1838. After white men successfully petitioned to get the word white put into the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1838. And they don't get back the right to vote, black men, and regardless of where they own property or not, had here until the 15th Amendment. So even stories that as nuanced as that, and understanding that from Reconstruction is critically important. It's also important to understanding why the case of getting rid of Confederate statues is not the same as what the President of the United States is trying to do now. With places like the President's house. Because if you know the story of Reconstruction, you know why those Confederate statues were put up. You know that it is not about telling a true history. You know that for those particular statues, it's about intimidation. Reconstruction is a crucial part to understanding the full history of the United States as it has become. Do we need, for right now in our quarter millennium year, to continue the reckoning, which I say began in 2020. In 2020 with George Floyd, but to have it more concrete, to have that concrete reckoning where we're actually discussing, do we need what would be termed a third Reconstruction? And what does that look like? Because after this moment, because this moment is going to pass. It doesn't seem like it now, and it may get worse. It may get worse before. In fact, it will certainly get worse. Worse before it gets better. But there will come a time where Donald John Trump and his ilk are not in the White House. And we starting now and going forward, we have to be prepared for how are we going to rebuild? How are we going to rebuild this country and rebuild it in a way that is going to be the one that has the one that embraces the diversity and the true multiracial racial democracy that we all want. We all want and deserve, that our ancestors have fought for, so that we do embrace those better angels instead of those worst demons. We can have that where there are going to have to be new amendments to the Constitution, perhaps, where we can talk about neutralizing or even getting rid of the electoral college. We can talk about proportional representation. We can talk about ranked choice voting. We can talk about multi-member districts, which is for members of the House. Some of them don't even take constitutional amendments. There's a cap on the number of members of the House of Representatives That's a statutory law. That was put in place in 1911. It doesn't have to just be 435 individuals. If you expand, and there are 2 bills in Congress ready to do that now. If you expand the number of members of the House of Representatives, suddenly you expand the diversity. Suddenly, more women are able to get elected. More people of color are able to get elected. More people from different religions are able to be elected. And they'll be elected. And it's easier representation, because right now, a member of Congress represents, on average, 700,000 people at a time. That's very hard for one person to do. But if you divide that, say, in a district of like 3 congressmen, or if you divide that into just by adding more seats to the House, suddenly representation becomes easier. Your congressperson becomes more accessible, and the people's house begins to reflect the people more. Not as soon as I'm just shooting out examples here of things that could be done. But there are things that can be done, and we have it in our power to do this. There's an unsung founding father, often unsung, and he's one of those individuals at the founding, because we have to remember, there were individuals at the founding who did not agree with slavery. Of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, 41 were slave owners, 15 were not. And then you had individuals like Marquis de Lafayette and Thomas Paine, who I'm about to quote, who said that if they had known that slavery was not going to be abolished by the Revolution, they would have supported it. Thomas Paine famously wrote in Common Sense, and we know common sense ain't all that common, but he wrote in his work, Common Sense, we, quote, we have it within our power to begin the world anew. That is something that is central to the American ethos, that you do not have to accept things as they are. You can make them be, you should know why they are, you should know history, you should study history, it's but you don't have to accept what they are. You can make them be what they are supposed to be. And everyone in this room, everyone outside has that power. You have your power. Alice Walker, the most common way people give up their power is by believing they don't have it in the first place. I want you to know, you do have power. You have it in your power to make this world, and this country, and this city, and this state better. You have it in your power to make the world anew. We can do this. That's my
Thank you, Phil, for making this possible. Thank you, members of the society and guests, for participating. And thank you to Amy and Mijuel for taking time, especially for Amy, knowing what's going on. So we got some refreshments in the back, and folks might be around for a little bit longer to talk to individually. And again, thank you. Thank you, thank you.
Another big round of applause for our panelists. That was wonderful. And as they walk off stage, I did text Warren Ori, those who are looking forward to hear Warren playing the bass up on stage. Don't have to be worried, he's okay, but he said he owes us one, he'll be back. He's a wonderful musician. So normally we have music right before and after the platform, but today we'll just have some committee and community announcements, and then our call for support. Thank you all so much. I loved how we ended on what are we building together. If you're interested in having a place to do some of that building, not the only place by far in Philadelphia, but that's really the project of what this place is. How do we try to build a better world together, and specifically, to Mijuel's last point, a multicultural democracy. So I think we should have you back, Mijuel, to talk about that specific project, I think. But yeah, another big round of applause for these wonderful guests. Thank you, Aissia.